Hello, everybody, and welcome to For the Love of Language. I'm EJ.
And I'm Stacy, and this is kind of a special episode today. We used to be live on Twitch for a while, and then we had to stop for a little bit, but we are back live on Twitch. So we are recording this episode live on Twitch with all of our friends here. So we're hoping to maybe do this more in the future, but if you follow us on Instagram, you can get those live updates of when we're going to be on Twitch so you can hang out with us in person. Isn't that cool?
Oh, yeah, such a good time. And yeah, this is going to be a cool episode because we're going to talk about the Navajo code talkers.
Yes. EJ and I have been very excited about this episode, and we already told people in stream, but we've actually done quite a bit of research behind this, and we have some notes because I think both of us really wanted to come at this topic from a place of like respect and historical accuracy and, respecting the people who are behind this story.
Definitely. Yeah. So from my end, most of that comes from I've read this book by Chester Nez called Code Talker that tells the story of one of the original Navajo code talkers. And that's most of where I'll be pulling from with my comments here.
Yeah, and some of the stuff that I've done, I looked into some of the other backgrounds, some of like the different perspectives on code talkers from the like military perspective, some of the things that the generals did and said and thought. So EJ kind of has the personal perspective of the story of the code talkers, and then I looked into like the CIA documents or lack thereof and all that stuff. So we have a couple different perspectives that we're coming from today, but maybe we should start out with EJ just telling us who are the code talkers? What is this? What are we talking about today?
Yeah, so basically the super high level view is that in World War II, you had a lot of conflict, and a big aspect of that is always communications and wanting to be able to communicate without the enemy being able to understand you.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's been all sorts of, machines and codes that have been devised, but a lot of them, especially at that time, had the flaw that they were extremely slow if you were actually going to encrypt something. I believe like the Enigma machines existed at the time, and like there were highly technical codes that were extremely difficult to crack, and the Enigma machine was
I think the
cracked.
Enigma machine came in like the middle, almost end of World War II, if my memory serves me.
I think you're right. I don't remember the exact date on that one, but just as like a comparison, it like there were effective ways to encode things, but they would have been extremely slow and they could be cracked. And so the American forces had the idea of using the Native American Navajo language as an unbreakable code. And there were a few things that made this idea especially effective. One of them being that the Navajo code, the Navajo language was not a written language at all at the time. So there were not books, or like today it would be relatively easy to detect something as Navajo, most likely because there is a lot of recorded content, there's a lot of written content, there's machine learning, language detection stuff, but back then it wasn't a written language. And so the only way that you would know Navajo would be basically if you were Navajo.
If you were Navajo or you were affiliated with the tribe or worked with them, some of the generals, like the reason that they kind of got the Navajo in the first place was because one of the like generals had worked with the Navajo in some like official government capacity, in terms of like managing reservations and stuff, and so knew a little bit of Navajo themselves and was like, oh hey, this language might be really good because I like know a little bit about it and I have access to these people.
Yeah. And there were Navajos who were already in the American military.
Yeah.
And so like when Chester Nez was recruited, he had already signed up for the Marines. He had gone through the Marines initial training when a bunch of the Navajo Marines were gathered together and tasked with creating this unbreakable code based on Navajo. So it was extremely effective. It was never deciphered during the war, and it was definitely a pivotal part of a lot of, battles and stuff that happened during World War II.
Yeah. So before we kind of go into some of like the nuances of like why they chose this code and like why it worked, I kind of want to talk about what the code looks like.
Yes.
Because what it looks like is not what, like when I was looking into this was not what I was expecting the code to look like. I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. It's kind of a combination of like military IPA, which is different from the, international phonetic alphabet, but it's kind of like a play on that. So
the military alphabet is like the Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, being able to assign a word to each letter. And a part of the idea behind those words is that they are very phonetically distinct from each other, so you're not going to mix them up.
Yeah. So that's kind of the basis for things. So when you hear people spelling that out, like Charlie, Delta, Gamma, like those kinds of things, Romeo, like that's what they're trying to communicate is the individual letter at the beginning of that word. And so the Navajo code was kind of based on that, but with Navajo words.
Well, and that was only
there's
one
also an element of
aspect
translation. Yeah, go ahead and take it away from here, EJ.
Yeah. So the first thing that the Navajos did, and Chester Nez talks about this in his book, the first thing that they did when they were asked to create a code was create an equivalent to that military alphabet in Navajo. Mm-hmm. And so actually the way that they did that was really interesting, because instead of just choosing a Navajo word that started out with whatever sound they were thinking of in English, they would choose an English word. And one of the examples that he comes back to a couple times is for the letter J. They took the English word jackass, and then they translated that English word into Navajo. And so the actual Navajo word that they're using doesn't start with a J at all.
Yeah.
But they're able to memorize their alphabet. And they even added another layer of complexity, because one of the ways that alphabetical codes can be broken is just with statistical analysis. In English, for example, E is the most common letter. And so if you're looking at a very simple cipher, just like a one-to-one letter kind of thing, you can actually extremely quickly just use statistics and say, okay, whatever letter is appearing most frequently is an E. To avoid that, the more common that a letter was, the more variants that they would create for it. So this like phonetic alphabet and a bunch of their translations are actually in the back of Chester Nez's book. And I'll pull out an example or a couple examples here. So going with the letter J, like I mentioned, they used the Navajo word for jackass, as well as the words for jaw and jerk.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at the letter F, they used the words for fur, fly, or fox to represent the English letters so that they could mix those up and make it a lot harder to figure out what letters they were using. But even once they created that alphabet, it's not like they were spelling out everything they were saying, because then you would have the same problem on the battlefield of, this is extremely slow for me to say all of this and decipher it. So there were definitely things that they would spell out, but then a lot of the time they would also just be speaking Navajo over the radio, and they would have, for words that might not exist in Navajo, like for specific types of planes or helicopters or different things.
like nuanced new words. They would come up
create
with they would create
Navajo
new
words. And so like some examples of that, I'll just like see if I can find a couple interesting ones here. I think there were some good ones for some of the like.
I had a couple of examples in my notes too. There was
like a department, they used dwelling house.
Yeah.
For desperate, they used down to last as their thing. For convoy, it was moving on water was how they would express it in Navajo.
Yeah.
A bomb, they turned into eggs.
Just eggs.
And just used the Navajo word for eggs. And so part of the argument is that even if you were Navajo, you wouldn't be able to understand what they were saying, because they decided
it was like a combination of like military slang. So you have a layer of like translation of like you need to know Navajo and you need to know English to like understand what they're saying, but then they're also adding like another layer of obscurity with like military talk and slang and all these like nuances. And of course, the, you know, just doing the first letter of the English word of the Navajo word. So this is
Yeah.
like a very layered, complex code. And it kind of took me a second. I'm not going to lie. When we were researching this, it took me a second to really kind of like break this down and be like, oh, wow. Okay, that's really genius. Like all of these
Right.
layers that they added on top of it. Like, even if you did know Navajo, you might not understand the code. Or if you knew Navajo and English, you still wouldn't like, there was a lot you had to know to like be able to be an effective communicator with this code, which is
Yeah.
absolutely awesome.
And then a couple other things that made the code particularly effective were that Navajo phonetics are so different from English
Yes.
phonetics. And so a lot of the time, an English speaker or a Japanese speaker wouldn't be able to differentiate the sounds that the Navajo code talkers were actually making because of those phonetic differences. So there were a lot of things that made it really interesting. And a little bit of context I think that's also interesting is before the Navajos made their code, which of course all had to be totally memorized because it's top secret and stuff. Before they did that, to be able to really rapidly transmit these messages, a lot of the times messages were just being conveyed in plain English because that was just like they needed it to be fast and effective, and that came at the cost of being understood. And so something that's a little bit funny that's mentioned in the Code Talker book is that a lot of times the Marines would just fill in their English messages with as much profanity as possible to try to confuse the Japanese, which is like, that's not going to help you at all.
I mean, A for effort.
So moving to the Code Talkers is like a huge step up from just like trying to use a lot of English profanity.
Just like shoving as many like fuck, shit, damn, all those things, just cram it in there. And the Japanese are probably like, okay. Like, cool story,
Right?
bro.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. So, speaking of this being top secret, this is kind of like what I was curious about and what I decided to dive into is it is now of course well known about like what this code is and how it works. This is not something that we would necessarily use in the military right now. Like there's they've got a bunch of other stuff that they're doing right now that none of us know about because it's top secret. But the way that like top secret things work is they'll be top secret for anywhere from like 10 to 20 years. And then the CIA will release documents of these like confidential top secret things. And you can like go in and take a look at all of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes. Like you can see like all the stuff that was once secret.
For the ones that they chose to release, right? They don't have
Yes.
to release everything, and they
don't
don't
have to release everything, but they do release quite a bit. And so they declassified these documents in 1968 with records from like 1943 to 1944. And there's honestly not a whole lot that are digitized. They're like what's awful about this is they they have a lot of documents they have to work with, and so not all of them are available online, but these documents like are available, and some of them are really kind of cool. I was just browsing through. They have like the names for the documents online, but they don't have like PDF copies of the documents, but you have things like rules for using the codes and ciphers of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. You have the actual like code list with like all the different types of codes that they used. They had a document that I thought was kind of interesting called Stereotypes in Japanese Army Cryptographic Systems. So they like analyzed the enemy's cryptographic systems as well, and they have like documentation of all of that too. So it's really, really cool. So hopefully one day we'll be able to see the actual documents, but if you do want to see them, they're like up in Washington or whatever. But the declassification process of these documents is pretty cool in my opinion. Like I've just like diving into the CIA website and just like seeing all this stuff that you can just check out is pretty cool. Like
it is.
At one point, none of us were allowed to know this stuff. And so you feel kind of sneaky, kind of special when you're looking into it.
Well, and that actually had a really direct impact on the Navajo code talkers themselves, like both during the war and for the like 20 something years after the war, that they weren't able to talk about it. Like no one knew what they had done for the nation. And so like even after serving with the Marines, Chester Nez gives like an example in his book of someone being like, "Oh, you're not a full citizen of the United States, you can't even vote." And like it's crazy when you think about it from like a cultural and like societal standpoint. Like the Navajos who did serve in the US military, they weren't allowed to vote. Like they didn't have all the rights, but they still went and served and fought for their country. And there were I want to pull up a couple other examples of things that happened just as far as like discrimination when Chester Nez was serving. And I will call out Chester Nez was like not the name that he would have originally gone by in Navajo. It was the name that he was given at boarding school.
Yeah. A lot of the Navajos that were in the military and that were participating in this had been shipped off to boarding school at some point and had been through that process, which is why they knew both English and Navajo. And that's kind of how they have that connection.
And they were punished in boarding school.
Like those schools, for those who don't know, those schools were very not okay. But they were where people like Chester got their education and gave them the ability to be put in this situation where they could help serve their country. And from what I recall from the little bit that I read of Chester's book as well, because I don't have the full book like EJ does, but I did read parts of it. A lot of these Native Americans, they did have like a lot of pride for their country and for their land, and they were honored to be a part of this process and to serve their country, even though they were considered like lesser than and they didn't have voting rights and all this awful stuff. Like they did a huge service for
the amount of like discrimination. Like he describes the great livestock slaughter where his family's sheep were taken into trenches and burned alive, and he's like smelling it and stuff, and like he describes it very matter-of-factly. But like despite everything, they viewed themselves as warriors and were proud to go serve and fight for their country. But what I wanted to bring up as far as like even when they were active Marines serving in like Guam and other places, the first time that Chester Nez they wanted to test in the field whether or not like these messages would actually work, right? So his officer, whoever it is, asks him to transmit a message in Navajo. The first time that he does this, the other American radio operators jam him because they think that the Japanese have infiltrated their like frequency. And so then they have to sort that out and be like, okay, don't jam this. We need to be able to send this.
Yeah.
But the worst one is, and this is just like a single page in this book, it's like absolutely insane, but the worst one, he is held at gunpoint by Americans thinking that he's Japanese and saying like, oh, you stole a Marine's clothes, like what are you doing? And he's just held at gunpoint and manages to convince them to like, okay, go get an officer or someone who can verify who we are. We're American. Yeah. We're like speaking English. And they're like, well, Japanese people can speak English too. And of course they're not, they're using other language as well to describe the Japanese and everything. But it's like an insane thing on like it's just a single page in his book of like, yeah, we were held at gunpoint. They thought we were Japanese when like they're on the
There's
front
like so many levels
lines.
where that's not okay.
Yeah, absolutely insane. But they were okay, and
Mhm.
they ended up having even like bodyguards and stuff assigned to them once their real value was seen. But yeah, absolutely
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah, I mean, there weren't a lot of these officers out there. I mean, there were plenty, like there were enough to, actually like use as communication officers, but these were kind of like a very specific subset of like the military themselves. And so there were super high up generals that were monitoring this stuff. Like these
Oh
guys
yeah.
needed to be protected because this was the way that they were gonna, like this was the only way that we were gonna get our message across and actually, I hate to say, but like succeed, like win the war, I guess. But they were
Right.
an integral part of that. But because it was so subtle, not even like lower ranking military members really fully understood like how valuable these people were because things had to be so secret.
Right. Even when he was held up at gunpoint, he couldn't be like, "Oh, I'm a code talker. I'm Navajo." Like they weren't
Yeah.
allowed to
The
share any of
there was
that.
like the only option was to be like, you need to get an officer to like verify my identity because like they can't know. Granted, it would have taken quite a bit for some like lower level officer to be able to like squeeze whatever info he could out of one of these like Navajo officers and done something with it just because like the code is complex and nobody else knows Navajo and stuff. But like still, like
Hmm.
when it comes to these types of like priorities and this level of secrecy, like it's paramount.
Well, and once he does have bodyguards, like once all the Navajo have bodyguards, Chester Nez actually conjectures in his book about whether part of the bodyguard's role would be to like kill him if he were to get captured.
Oh shit.
And he's like,
Oh
he doesn't
no.
know, but like definitely conjectures that.
I mean, yeah, I feel like it makes sense. Like I can see the train of thought. They definitely wouldn't want that code to be broken or they wouldn't want them to squeal if they got like torture. Oh my lord. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not an easy job. It's not an easy job. And yeah, to like come home after all of that and not be able to say anything about like what you actually did, I'm sure was pretty difficult as well. But
Well, and I think a lot of them even died before it was like released to the public.
yeah, because it was, like I said, it was like a good 20 years later when stuff was declassified. And, a lot of stuff can happen in 20 years and conditions on reservations are not great by any means. So, I'm not surprised at all. There's actually very few of these code talkers left. First of all, just because, we're World War II vets are in short supply, just broadly speaking, because it was a
It was a
while
long
ago.
time ago.
It was a long
Yeah, it
time
was a
ago.
long time ago.
But there's a bunch of other things that kind of play into it as well. But luckily, I think Chester Nez's book was written and published in like 2005 ish.
I can check real quick. I think it was about then.
Yeah, it was it
This
was in like
says 2011 actually.
2011. Yeah. So it was like between 2005 2011 that this book was being like written and published and everything. And since then there've been a lot of really good discussions about this kind of a thing. We've come a long way in talking about native people and their significance to pretty much everything. And I like to think we're getting a little bit better with that kind of a thing, in terms of like recognizing them, respecting them. There's always more that we can do, but there's actually like a book of the same name, Code Talkers. That's written for like middle school aged kids. And so like when I was looking up stuff for this episode, I came across that book, and I came across like lesson plans that teachers have to like talk about this the book, and to talk about like code talkers and this kind of stuff. So it was really good to see that the people are like, we're giving back a little bit. We're showing recognition for the amazing work that these people have done, because it really did help kind of turn the tides of the way World War II played out.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it's hard to like actually pinpoint the precise significance of it, but it definitely was an important aspect of, American communications during the war.
Yeah, I mean, war is super complicated. There's never a one thing that's gonna like turn the tide. But like all of I mean, if you ask me, like communication is probably one of the most important things when it comes to like battle and organization. And I mean, if we just think about political stuff right now, like communication and being able to talk with officers and politicians and everything, like all of that is very key in deciding how things play out. Even during peacetime, we need to have like effective means of communication. So like I feel like when we're discussing communication tactics in military situations, that for me is like at the top of the list of the things that really make a difference. Like you can have all the tanks in the world, but if you can't tell those tanks what to do, you're screwed. You know? Like there's only so much you can do if you can't communicate, especially across long distances and stuff.
Definitely. I really like that point. I wanted to bring up as well, just slightly tangentially, like the Navajo code talkers are extremely, well known at this point, but there have also been other instances in history when like a language itself was actually used as a code. And so like there's an article called Code Talker on Wikipedia, and it lists times when like Basque, Cherokee, Choctaw, Hungarian in 2022 in the current war between Russia and Ukraine. There's actually lots of times.
Hungarian is insane. I had a syntax professor who's Hungarian, and so we learned a little bit about Hungarian syntax, and oh my god, like you think like Russian syntax is hard with all of their stuff? Good lord, yeah, Hungarian is next level.
Well, it's in the Uralic language family along with like Finnish, but people don't talk about Hungarian as much, I don't think. But there's a lot of native Hungarian speakers in Ukraine, which is why it works there. But yeah, I just wanted to call out, like, there have been other cases when a language is used as code.
Yeah. I mean, I think it seems like a pretty effective way of doing things, especially if you have like bilingual populations. Like if we look at the structure of the code itself, where you're having to translate a word from one language to another and then use part of that word that you translated into, and then like combine that with like other words or other letters to then create like a sentence or a word. Like that's the more layers you can add on, the more like the stronger your code is going to be. So having like another language just like ready to go, I mean, for me, it just kind of like makes sense that you could use the same pattern but with different languages, and then maybe mix up, you can mix up what parts of the words that you're translating can be like used or whatnot. But it seems like just an efficient code in general.
Yeah. One question that I would surface, I'd be interested what you think about this, Stacey. Like, part of the reason that Navajo was so effective in World War II is because it was not a written language, and not much was known about it outside of the Navajo tribes in the US. Do you think that it would have been cracked if instead it was in like today's environment where it is a written language? And, it's on Duolingo and stuff. Do you think it would have been cracked, and how long do you think it would have taken?
I think, yes, it could be cracked. I mean, I don't know enough about code specifically. Like, code and how codes work is like a special subdivision of
Mm.
linguistics. But I think having it undocumented definitely helped
Mm-hmm.
because that means that, you know, less people have access or know what it is, right? But just because you have access to a language doesn't necessarily make you good at it. And
Mm-hmm.
when we consider how this code would have been transmitted, it would have been like a series of words that people were comfortable using. And so someone who's maybe not familiar with some of the like phonetic aspects of Navajo, which is something that you can't necessarily encode into writing,
Mm-hmm.
that might have also added a level of complexity as well, because where you put the stress, how you separate the words is also going to like determine how you're interpreting the what you're hearing, right? So even if you're like listening to it over the radio and you have a Navajo dictionary in front of you, like you still might have a hard time because it did not like hearing those phonetic differences and then like actually trying to parse it out is a pretty difficult challenge in and of itself. Anyone who's ever learned a language can say that like you need people to speak slowly to you when you're first learning, because you're
Yeah.
not sure how to parse out words and how to separate things. And so I think that level alone would, like, even with documentation, would require a
Mm.
lot of practice and a lot of training to break. That's just my 2 cents.
I'm gonna make a little bit of a facetious comment here and
Okay.
say, like, I just put it into Chat GPT. Come on.
Get out of this. Get out of this podcast, EJ. Get out. Get out of this podcast.
But in all seriousness, like if you wanted to be able to decipher something like this, you would have to have an actual speaker of Navajo. And
Yeah.
if you didn't have someone who was a speaker of the language, everyone knows it takes a long time to learn a language. So I like if we given enough inputs, someone probably would have been able to figure it out. But even having like the resources and stuff we have today, I think it could potentially be possible actually, like with there being as many Navajo texts as there are, like I'm sure someone is developing machine translations in Navajo and voice to text recognition. And so in all seriousness, like it might be very reasonable right now to say like, oh yeah, just stick that in a machine translation and you would actually be able to mostly decipher it at this point. But even so, because of how limited those resources are in Navajo, like it would still be difficult, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's like I kind of said before, I think it's doable, but it would still be hard. It would still be
Yeah.
difficult.
I think people would be able to figure out that it was like an actual language, though, being
Yes.
spoken relatively
Yeah.
quickly.
They could
Because,
at least piece that together. They would
yeah,
be like, okay, there is like a pattern. Yeah.
yeah, like you're not going to speak a code and like random letters and stuff super naturally, but the way that someone speaks a language, I think you'd be able to tell that it is a language. And because we do have resources, like I think you would be able to pretty quickly figure out which one it was. And so,
Yeah.
like, I think it would be doable, but it would still take a lot of effort.
Yeah, and I mean, if we consider maybe what the Japanese were hearing on their end, for the record, this code was mostly used in the Americans against the Japanese, like that end of World War II. This I don't think this was mostly used in like Europe. This was more in like the battles with the Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
But like on the Japanese end, they probably found out. Like I think they might have pieced together that it was some sort of language, but they probably had no idea. They didn't even know what they were looking for. Like they were like, okay, well, this is something. This is some sort of language, but they probably even could have narrowed it down to this might be a Native American language, but just given the knowledge of the time, the access to resources, yeah, good luck narrowing it down to Navajo. Do you know how many registered tribes there are in the United States? And then all the like unregistered tribes, like good fucking luck.
Right, especially when it wasn't a written language at all. Like you'd have to like send people to every single tribe to try and learn their language, and that would just not work out.
Yeah, it would have it just wasn't on the cards for the Japanese. It was just a straight up loss in terms of breaking this code for them, just with the way things were playing out in the time and the, you know, amount of technology they had and everything. It was a genius move on the Americans' part, not gonna lie.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would want to add about the Code Talkers?
Other than I appreciate that you and I were able to like talk about this. This was something that I personally didn't know a whole lot about before EJ brought it up. I mean, I knew that Navajo had been used in World War II, but I didn't quite understand like the extent of it or anything. And so I appreciated being able to learn more about the Code Talkers and kind of like what went on behind the scenes and how the code was like structured and everything. And it was a really good exercise for me to kind of like contemplate about, okay, maybe what if I were to build a code? Like, what would I want as part of it? And what as a linguist might I be able to add to a code to make it, you know, indecipherable, so to speak. So maybe we can do another episode where we play around with that.
No, I think that'd be a great idea.
Yeah, and one of our moderators here in chat, Zabadian, also brings up Enigma. I think it might be really cool to talk about Enigma at some point too, because
We certainly can.
Enigma being like the first like linguistic thing, and there's like a whole like Enigma itself is like a very amazing feat of human engineering, and it also brings and there's a lot of like linguistic philosophy we could talk about behind it as well, which I think would be fun to get into.
Yeah, I think we could definitely dive into that. For all of our listeners, I would highly recommend that you pick up Chester Nez's book Code Talker and hear it more from his voice and you know, from the other stories that have been told. We definitely wanted to approach this with a lot of respect and with some research, but I think it's well worth picking up that book, especially yourself, and reading through it. And when it comes to like the Enigma machine and other things, one book that I really, really like and that maybe we can talk a little bit more about is a book called The Woman Who Smashed Codes.
Ooh.
About a woman named Elizabeth Smith Friedman. And it's a fantastic book and talks some about enigmas as well as other things. So definitely some cool resources to look into there. But I'm really glad we were able to talk about the Code Talkers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. My goodness, my voice just gave out. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to all of our lovely listeners. Like I said, hit us up on For the Love of Language on Instagram so you can see when we're going to be live on Twitch, and so you can see when our episodes are coming out. And you know, just be aware of all the stuff we've got going on. And we love to hear from you, from all of our listeners, whether it's here on Twitch or on Discord or on Instagram. If you have questions, thoughts, ideas of stuff you want us to talk about, let us know, because we love questions from listeners. They're just juicy, juicy, juicy. So thank you all so much.
All right, till next time.
Bye.